Hey guys, Tyler here. For today's video, we're going to respond to a viral video that's titled Jordan Peterson versus 20 Atheists. As many pointed out, originally the title of the video was actually called One Christian versus 20 Atheists, but allegedly Jordan Peterson himself actually requested Jubilee to change the title for the video as it was getting very viral. Now, without further hesitation, let's first define the terms first. That way we can respond to the video in question. I consider myself to be an atheist, and so the question then becomes, what exactly do you mean by atheist? When I use the word atheist to describe my position on the existence of deities or supernatural being, basically what I'm referring to is a person who does not believe in any sort of god or gods according to most dictionary definition. And so basically, my position on whether or not a god or gods actually exist is a separate question than if I actually have knowledge. And so I see atheism and agnosticism addressing separate things. Atheism refers to my belief, agnosticism refers to my lack of knowledge about certain issues. And so that's how I'm using the word atheist throughout the whole entire video. That way no one is actually confused about what exactly I'm referring to. And so without further hesitation, let us respond to the video in question.
Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
As you guys saw directly in the video, the very first claim was that atheists have no idea what exactly they're rejecting. Now, when I was 17 years old, I was really big on comparative mythology. And so basically what I would do is buy a lot of books on comparative mythology spanning from different regions of the world. For example, this is my copy of Egyptian mythology right here. This is my copy of Mesopotamian mythology right here. This is my copy of Norse mythology right here. This is my copy of the Greek mythologies. And of course, I have my own personal copy of the Bible right there. And so how exactly does one obtain knowledge? The first way that people actually obtain knowledge is directly from reading material. Because I have these sort of copies of these various types of book, that would mean I'm exposed to different sort of ideas, different sort of philosophies about the various natures of the various gods. And that would also mean that I'm exposed to the idea of these different deities and can choose whether or not I'm actually going to accept these ideas as literal metaphysical truth or not true. And because of that exposure, and also because of education, you also get exposure directly. And so knowledge comes directly from reading, comes directly from education. That's like one way to actually obtain knowledge. Another way for a person to actually obtain knowledge is directly through trial and error. And so basically, when you don't know how to bounce a ball, you have to be shown how to bounce the ball. And so you obtain knowledge also directly from life experiences. And so basically, because I have these sort of collection of these different books, that means I obtain different kind of concept philosophies in my head about the various natures of the different gods. I got exposure to the Norse gods, I got exposure to the Greek gods, I got exposure to the Egyptian gods, and of course the Christian God, because I was raised in a Christian family. And so because of these different exposures, I can choose to accept these claims to be metaphysically true or not accept these claims to be metaphysically true. And so basically, when it comes down to knowledge, according to the same person in the video that responded to Jordan Peterson, atheists actually have more religious knowledge than the believers of said religions. And so in terms of knowledge, I would say that the vast majority of atheists, according to the data, do in fact have knowledge of religions, and that's the main reason why they reject the claims in the first place. Another way for a person to obtain knowledge is directly from listening to the argumentations from apologists. And basically, for the case of the Christian God, they describe a God that basically exists outside of space and time. They describe a God that also is all powerful, it is all knowing, and basically is all loving. Now, there's also other different kind of concepts for gods too. For example, one popular idea during the late 17th, 18th centuries was actually something that is known as deism. And essentially, with the case of deism, they basically propose a creator of a universe that created everything and just simply left after a certain period of time. Now, that idea might sound more plausible in comparison to the other ideas thus far I was talking about, but the main problem with the case of deism is that it actually relies heavily on something that is known as the watchmaker argument. And essentially, the watchmaker argument goes as follows: that basically there's something that is so intelligently designed and is made of different components, and that's why, of course, there's something like a watch that's actually created, and therefore the universe is also created too. To which I would say that the watch is actually made up of different components, and so there are different kind of gizmos inside that watch that makes up the watch. And so you need like a maker of that particular gizmo or that particular gizmo and so on and so forth to actually create the watch that you actually have on your wrist. And because watches are made up of different gizmos, that would mean that the deistic God in question must have a creator, which must have a creator, which must have a creator, and so on and so forth. Basically an infinite loop of creators to basically create that creator.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this is kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way.
If God is defined in such a way to just mean consciousness itself, then that definition is completely useless to me. Because basically to refer to consciousness as this God must mean, or at least signalize to me, that there's something supernatural about the idea of consciousness itself, but I don't see necessarily consciousness as a supernatural property itself. Because I would say that the main reason why we have consciousness in the first place, it comes directly from our brain. So our sensories, like sights, sound, and so on, comes directly from our head. That's where consciousness comes from. So I don't see any sort of supernatural component about the whole entire issue of consciousness, because again, to define God as consciousness is to say that there's something supernatural about consciousness. And there's no such supernatural aspect of consciousness itself. Because we can test brains, we can see brains, and actually experience the consciousness because of our brain. But anyway, if the claim in the original first clip was that atheists don't know necessarily what they're rejecting, my counter-argumentation is basically this: that people who claim these sort of beliefs or these different kind of God concepts, they have no idea what they're talking about either. If atheists don't know what they don't believe, then the believers don't know what they actually believe then. Because all these kind of God concepts, they're all contradictory. Nobody knows what they're talking about. And so basically it's all just a game of just speculation. But let's see the next claim that Peterson has made.
Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
When I saw that video clip for the first time, it basically reminded me how exactly the ideas of moral absolutism makes no sort of sense whatsoever. For those who have no idea what exactly is moral absolutism, it's pretty much the idea that there are some things that are inherently right and inherently wrong, and that there's no sort of middle ground within the things that are right or wrong. Let's take, for example, something as simple as lying. Now, according to moral absolutism, lying is always wrong no matter the context because lying is lying. Meanwhile, for the case of other ideas that are not based upon the ideas of moral absolutism, there are some contexts in which lying is actually okay. And the whole entire hypothetical is basically to show us that there are cases like, Nazi Germany, where lying is actually useful to protect people who were actually in prison and also tortured and killed underneath that system when the Nazis were in power. And so basically in that scenario, lying is actually justified because you're saving more lives, and it's not necessarily black and white to say that lying is just always bad. And so in that sort of scenario, basically it comes across to me for the answer that Jordan Peterson had done, that basically he's actually victim blaming the Jews for, of course, actually suffering underneath Nazi Germany. He's also victim blaming the people who were lying to basically save the skin of the Jewish people during the whole entire event of World War II. And so it's like, it makes no sort of sense to say that lying is always wrong. It just does not make any sort of sense to me.
Right? So, yeah, so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12ths Christian or something like that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12ths, but Christian.
well,
I don't understand.
I hesitate to do that personally because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming.
As you guys saw directly from the video clip, essentially what he's trying to say is basically this. There is no sort of criteria whatsoever for a person to actually be a Christian as long as somebody acts out the stuff that a Christian would do. That makes a person 1/3 of a Christian, and so on and so forth, even though they're not necessarily really a Christian. The thing is that people find their own personal moral truths directly from experience. They find their moral truths directly from the environment that they're living in, and so on. There's like a lot of different factors on how exactly people arrive to their particular moral truths. That being said, although people like me might have some sort of moral things that might overlap with Christians and what they actually do, the reality is that when it comes down to fundamental metaphysical claims on the universe, that's what makes us different, right? And so basically, the fundamental difference between me and somebody who's a Christian is that I don't necessarily actually believe in the metaphysical claims of the supernatural, whereas they do in fact believe in the metaphysical claims of the supernatural. And so when you try to encompass the word Christian to mean anybody who actually do good stuff, essentially, number one, it suggests that without being a Christian, you cannot actually do good things. And number two, it renders the word Christian meaningless because essentially it says that everybody's a Christian, and that's not necessarily true. You need to actually accept certain propositions of Christianity to actually be a Christian. So to conclude my personal thoughts about this whole entire debate, it seems as though that Jordan Peterson is suggesting that there is no such thing as an atheist because all people, according to him, act out as Christians, and that therefore everybody also believe in consciousness, and because everybody believe in consciousness, there is no such thing as an atheist. And that basically that anybody, including atheists, also worship something even if they don't actually believe in something. And another thing that he also said, like I said earlier in the video, is that he thinks that atheists have no idea what exactly God is because he used a particular definition that most people don't use to basically say, well, geez, because atheists don't know my particular definition, therefore they're stupid and therefore they don't know exactly what they're talking about. It's like this type of person is basically a sophist. He uses like a lot of fancy words and just say nothing. Like all the type of vocabulary that he says nothing and often contradicts himself and makes no sort of sense to me. But what do you guys think? Tell me in the comment section down below. And as always, I'll see you guys next video.